On her first time, he completely lost control. No one imagined that one night would change everything between them, awakening feelings neither of them expected. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because what happened after that night will leave you speechless. The rain hammered against the bookstore windows with an intensity that made the old wooden frames vibrate. Emma ran her hand across the worn oak counter, feeling beneath her fingers the marks of time, the stories of decades written into every crack. It was 9 o'clock on a Thursday evening in the heart of Manhattan, and she was about to flip the closed sign when the silhouette of a man appeared on the other side of the fogged glass door. The man who entered didn't seem to belong in this place. His charcoal grey suit, perfectly tailored, contrasted with the shelves packed with old books and the smell of aged paper that permeated every corner. His Italian leather shoes, now stained with water, left dark marks on the hardwood floor she had polished so carefully just an hour before. Emma noticed how his broad shoulders briefly blocked the amber streetlight, how his hands, large with long fingers, gripped the leather briefcase like a shield. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice was a hoarse murmur, tired, as if he carried the weight of the world in every syllable. "I know it's late, but—" Emma looked up from her ink-stained hands from the labels she'd been placing all day. Her hazel eyes met his. Blue, a deep blue like the Atlantic Ocean she'd only seen in photographs, and something stopped in her chest. It wasn't love at first sight, because love needs time to grow. It was recognition, like when you read the first lines of a book and you just know, that this story will change something inside you. "No problem," she responded, and her smile was genuine, warm, illuminating her youthful 22-year-old face. "Rain doesn't respect business hours. What are you looking for?" James, though she didn't know his name yet, felt something loosen in his chest hearing that voice. He was 45 years old, had built a business empire from nothing, had dined with senators and closed million-dollar deals in glass offices atop skyscrapers, but it had been so long since someone had smiled at him like that, without expecting anything in return, without calculating his usefulness. "A book about the Brooklyn Bridge," he explained, approaching the counter. "A first edition, if possible. It's for—" He hesitated. "Someone special?" Emma nodded, wiping her hands on the blue apron she wore over her simple cotton dress. She moved between the shelves with the natural grace of someone who knew every inch of her territory. Her fingers traced the spines of books as if caressing old friends. And he watched, fascinated by that familiarity, that almost spiritual connection with printed words. "Here," she said after 15 minutes, carefully bringing down a volume with reverent care. "First edition from 1883. The illustrations are original steel engravings. Look at how they captured the light on the cables. It's like you can feel the New York sun on your skin." James took the book, but his eyes remained on her, on how her cheeks flushed slightly when talking about something she loved, on how her hands, small and delicate, held this treasure as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. "How is it that you—" he began. "Found it so quickly," she completed with a mischievous smile. "I live here, well, not literally, though sometimes Mrs. Anderson tells me she should charge me rent. I know every book, every corner. This bookstore is—" she searched for words. "It's my cathedral." And so began a conversation that should have lasted 5 minutes, but stretched into 2 hours. James, the businessman who measured every second, who converted time into money and words into contracts, found himself talking about trips he'd made to London and Tokyo, cities he'd known but never really seen, because he was always in meetings, always chasing the next deal, the next success. Emma told him about her modest dreams, finishing her literature degree she was taking at night at Columbia, maybe someday having her own larger bookstore, traveling across America to see the old libraries of Boston and Philadelphia. Every word she spoke was tinged with a genuine passion he'd forgotten existed. When he finally left the bookstore, with the book tucked under his arm protected from the rain that still fell heavily, James stopped on the empty sidewalk. The lights of Manhattan reflected in the puddles, and the distant roar of traffic on Fifth Avenue was like a constant heartbeat of the city. He breathed deeply, feeling the humid air fill his lungs, and realized he was smiling, really smiling, not that professional half-smile he wore in business meetings. Inside the bookstore, Emma turned off the lights one by one, leaving only the small desk lamp lit. She stood looking at the door through which he'd left, absent-mindedly touching the simple silver necklace her grandmother Margaret had given her on her 18th birthday. Something had changed during those 2 hours. The air seemed different, charged with a possibility she couldn't name but felt vibrating in every cell of her body. She didn't yet know that this man would return. She didn't know that in the coming months, her life would take such dramatic turns that she'd sometimes wonder if she hadn't fallen into one of those romantic novels she loved to read. She didn't know that love, true love, isn't just butterflies in your stomach and stolen glances. It's choice, it's courage, it's unknown territory where each step can be a fall or a flight. She locked the door, clutched her worn bag to her chest, and stepped out into the rainy Manhattan night. The subway would take her to the Bronx, to the small apartment she shared with her grandmother, to the simple life she knew and loved. But something had begun, something that neither she nor her grandmother could stop. James appeared at the bookstore the next day, and the day after, and the next. Each time with a different excuse. He needed reading recommendations for a trip, wanted to give something special to important business partners, was looking for rare copies for his personal library, which, he said with an embarrassed smile, was full of books he'd never opened. Emma began to expect him, though she didn't dare admit it even in her most secret thoughts. Mrs. Anderson, the 70-year-old owner of the bookstore, who had known Emma since she was a shy little girl coming in to look for fairy tales, watched everything with her wise, wrinkled eyes. "Be careful, dear," she warned one afternoon as they organized new orders in the back room. "Men like that come from a world that doesn't understand ours. The differences aren't just about money, they're about—" she searched for the word, "gravity. They live in a different orbit." Emma nodded, but how could she explain that when James looked at her? He seemed to see beyond the stained apron, the artlessly tied hair, the mended shoes she wore because new ones were a luxury she couldn't afford. How to describe the sensation of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life? The first shared coffee happened on a Wednesday afternoon. She had prepared coffee in the small electric pot in the back room, knowing by instinct that he would arrive at 5 o'clock sharp, when the sun began to paint the Manhattan facades gold. James entered shaking the November cold from his shoulders, and the aroma of coffee welcomed him like an embrace. "Is this for me?" he asked, surprised. "It's for whoever needs it," she replied, passing him a chipped but clean mug. "And you look like someone carrying too much weight on your shoulders." He sat on the small stool by the counter, holding the cup between his hands, as if it were a treasure. There was something about the domesticity of that moment. The steaming coffee, the golden light filtering through the windows, the comfortable silence that settled between them, that squeezed his heart in a way he hadn't experienced since his marriage had collapsed 6 years ago. "How did you end up working in a bookstore?" he asked, wanting to really know her, not just the surface layers people showed in first conversations. Emma leaned against the counter, looking out the window at the street where Manhattan life flowed in its organized chaos. "My grandmother Margaret brought me here when I was 7, she began, her voice soft but firm. "Something difficult had just happened at home. My mother had left. My father worked so much we hardly ever saw him. Mrs. Anderson let me sit in that corner," she pointed to a small space between 2 shelves, "and read anything I wanted. She saved me, I think. Books saved me. They taught me there are thousands of possible lives, thousands of different endings, that the story you're living isn't the only one that exists." James felt something move in his chest, a crack in the armor he'd built over decades. "I've spent 20 years building something," he confessed, surprising himself with the honesty. "A company, a name, a legacy, I suppose. But lately I wonder what for whom? My ex-wife took my daughter to Chicago 6 years ago. I see her 3 times a year. In business meetings everyone respects me, but no one really knows me. It's like living in a glass display case, beautiful from the outside, empty inside." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the type of silence where unspoken words weigh more than those pronounced. Emma extended her hand, small with short unpainted nails, and placed it briefly on his, a touch that lasted barely 2 seconds but burned like fire and soothed like water at the same time. "Maybe you're looking in the wrong places," she said simply. That night James drove his Mercedes through Manhattan for hours without a fixed destination. The illuminated streets passed like a blur of gold and red lights. He ended up calling Michael, his best friend since college, the only one who had been by his side through all the successes and failures. "I think I'm going crazy," James said without preamble when his friend answered. "Tell me something new," Michael responded with that dry humor that characterized him. "What happened now? Did you buy another building you don't need?" "I met someone." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute for 3 seconds. "And?" Michael finally asked. "You meet people every day." "Not like this. She's—" James searched for words, parking the car at a lookout overlooking the illuminated Statue of Liberty. "She's different. She makes me want to be better. She makes me remember who I was before becoming this." Michael whistled low. "That sounds dangerous, brother. Sounds like trouble." "I know," James admitted, looking at the lights of the city he'd conquered. "But that suddenly seemed strange. But I think it's the right kind of trouble." The second month brought changes Emma didn't expect. She arrived at the bookstore one December morning when the Manhattan cold bit at cheeks and her breath formed white clouds in the air, and found Mrs. Anderson practically radiant. "Dear," the old woman exclaimed, her eyes shining behind thick glasses, "I have wonderful news. They bought the building, but the new owner has promised to keep the bookstore running, and he's going to raise all our salaries." Emma felt a mixture of relief and curiosity. In Manhattan, small businesses disappeared every day, devoured by international franchises and luxury stores. That someone wanted to preserve an independent bookstore was almost a miracle. "Who's the buyer?" she asked, hanging her cheap but warm coat on the entrance rack. "I don't know yet," Anderson replied, excited. "But the lawyer who came said it was someone who valued culture and traditions." "Imagine, in these times—" Emma nodded, but something in her stomach twisted with an intuition she couldn't name. An intuition that would be confirmed 2 weeks later. James arrived one afternoon looking different, more nervous than usual, his hands playing with the car keys as he entered the nearly empty bookstore. It was closing time, when the orange light of dusk slipped through the windows, creating long shadows between the shelves. "I need to tell you something," he began, and Emma knew immediately that whatever it was, it would change something between them. He told her everything. How he'd discovered the building was for sale, how the idea that she might have to look for another job, that this place she loved so much could disappear, had kept him awake for nights on end. How he'd used contacts and money to ensure the bookstore continued to exist. "I didn't do it to pressure you or to buy you in any way," he said quickly, seeing how her face went through a series of emotions he couldn't decipher. "I did it because when I think of New York, of my city, of what's worth preserving, I think of places like this, of people like you." Emma sat slowly on the stool behind the counter. Her hands trembled slightly. "It's too much," she whispered. "James, this is too much. I don't know how to process this." "You don't have to do anything," he replied, approaching, but maintaining a respectful distance. "I just wanted you to know the truth. The building now belongs to a trust I founded. You keep working here. Anderson is still the boss. Nothing changes except this place is safe." "Everything changes," she replied, looking up to meet his eyes directly. "Because now I know you can solve problems with money. That your world works that way. And I come from a place where problems don't get solved, you just learn to live with them." It was their first real fight. There were no shouts or slammed doors. It was worse. It was silence. James left without knowing if he'd ruined something precious by trying to protect it. Emma closed the bookstore that night with tears in her eyes, confused between gratitude and fear of entering a world where she didn't belong. Her grandmother Margaret, sitting in the small kitchen of their Bronx apartment with a cup of chamomile tea between her veined hands, listened to everything without interrupting. "Do you love him?" the old woman finally asked, with that direct wisdom that only 82 years of life give. "Grandma, I barely know him." "Nonsense. The heart knows in seconds what the head takes years to accept." "Do you love him?" Emma closed her eyes. She thought about the way James looked at her, as if she were the most interesting thing in the world, about how he really listened when she spoke, not just waiting for his turn to talk, about how their hands sought each other without thinking, like magnets, about how the world seemed brighter, more colorful since that rainy night. "I think so," she finally admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "And it terrifies me." Margaret nodded, taking her granddaughter's hand. "True love always scares you, sweetheart, because when you truly love, you give hostages to fate. But living without love, without risk, that's not living. It's just existing." 3 days passed without seeing each other. 3 days where James sent messages that she read but didn't respond to. 3 days where Emma constantly thought about him while organizing books, serving customers, and trying to convince herself it was better this way. It was Rachel, her best friend since high school, who shook her from her paralysis. Rachel had landed a dream job at a major consulting firm after years of effort and showed up at the bookstore on the 4th day with a bottle of cheap wine and 2 plastic cups. "We're celebrating," she announced, entering like a whirlwind of energy. "They promoted me. I'm now direct assistant to one of the senior executives. It's incredible. I've only been at the company 3 months and already—" She stopped seeing Emma's face. "What happened?" she asked, setting the wine on the counter. "And don't tell me nothing, because I've known you since you were 12, and that's your everything's wrong face." Emma told her everything. The building, the trust, her confusion. Rachel listened, nodding occasionally, and when Emma finished, she pulled out her phone. "Look, I want to show you the boss I just met," she said, searching through her photos. "He's an incredible man, very dedicated, treats everyone with respect even though he's a millionaire." She handed over the phone. Emma looked at the screen, and the world stopped. There, in a photo taken at a corporate dinner, was James, smiling politely at the camera, surrounded by suited executives. "Small world," Emma murmured, feeling reality fold in on itself. "Wait, you know him?" Rachel's eyes widened. "Is he the one? The man from the bookstore?" And so the 2 worlds Emma had kept separate in her mind, her simple life and James's life, definitively collided. That night, Rachel told her more about James Blackwell from the perspective of his employees, how he'd built his company from scratch, how he was known for being tough but fair, how he'd donated millions to charities but never spoke about it publicly, how, according to office rumors, he'd been alone since his divorce, rejecting any attempts by his friends to set him up with women. "If someone like him chose you," Rachel said, taking her friend's hands, "it's not out of pity or whim. Men like him don't have time for games. I think you should give him a chance, a real chance." Emma called him that night. He answered on the 2nd ring, his voice careful, hopeful. "Can you come to Central Park tomorrow?" she asked. "There's something I need to tell you." They met by Bethesda Fountain. It was Sunday morning and the park was full of families, joggers, elderly people feeding ducks in the lake. Emma saw him before he saw her, tall, in a dark wool coat, hands in pockets, looking lost in the middle of the Sunday crowd. "I'm scared," she said without preamble when she stood before him. "Scared of not being enough for your world. Scared that one day you'll wake up and realize you made a mistake. Scared that what I'm feeling is too big, too fast, too intense." James took a step toward her, closing the distance. His blue eyes looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "I'm scared too," he confessed. "Scared of ruining this by not knowing how to love you correctly. Scared that my money, my position, will come between us. Scared that you'll think I'm trying to buy you when I just want to care for you." "But Emma," he took her face in his hands, "the only thing that terrifies me more than all of that is the idea of not trying, of losing this, of losing you." She closed her eyes, feeling tears fall down her cheeks. And then, without thinking any more, she stood on tiptoe and kissed him. It was a kiss salty with tears, sweet with hope, deep with all the contained emotion. Around them, the world kept spinning. But for them, in that moment, there were only 2 people daring to bet on something impossible and perfect at the same time. "Let's go slow," she whispered when they separated. "Please, I need time to process all this, to understand how your world works without losing myself in it." "All the time you need," he promised, kissing her forehead, with a tenderness that contradicted his reputation as a ruthless businessman. "We'll go at your pace." And for a time it worked. They went to dinner at discreet restaurants where no one bothered them. They walked through old New York neighborhoods, discovering hidden cafes and used bookstores. He taught her about wines and travel. She taught him to see beauty in small things. A sunset from an ordinary park, the smell of freshly baked bread in a neighborhood bakery, the satisfaction of finding a book you thought was lost forever. But calm never lasts when 2 such different worlds try to converge. And the storm approaching would test whether their love was strong enough to withstand it. The invitation arrived in a cream paper envelope with gold letters embossed in relief. James's mother, Catherine Blackwell Montgomery, requested the honor of the presence of her son and guest at a family dinner at her Upper East Side residence. Emma held the invitation with trembling hands. She knew this moment would come. Meeting the family was inevitable, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. "You don't have to go if you don't feel ready," James assured her for the 15th time as they drove toward the Upper East Side, toward those neighborhoods where buildings looked like palaces, and every parked car was worth more than everything she'd earned in her life. "I want to go," she replied, smoothing for the umpteenth time the only remotely elegant dress she owned, a simple black one she'd bought on sale at H&M 2 years ago. "They're your family. It's important to you." What she didn't say was that she was terrified, that she'd been up all night Googling how to behave at formal dinners, which silverware to use for which course, how to address upper-class people. That her grandmother Margaret had spent the afternoon teaching her manners the old woman had learned when she worked in big houses before the war. Catherine Blackwell's apartment wasn't an apartment. It was a penthouse of 3,000 square feet with panoramic views of all Manhattan. The ceilings were so high that voices echoed. The Persian rugs under her feet probably cost more than the entire Bronx apartment. There were paintings on the walls that Emma recognized from her art history classes. They were originals. "Mother, this is Emma," James introduced, his hand firm and warm on the small of her back, an anchor in this sea of opulence. Catherine Blackwell was a 68-year-old woman who looked 50. Her grey hair was styled in an elegant bun, her navy blue cocktail dress was clearly designer, and her eyes, the same blue as James's, evaluated Emma in exactly 3 seconds. "Delighted," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "James has told us so much about you." The dinner was a test of endurance. There were 7 different types of silverware. Emma discreetly observed the others and tried to imitate. James's younger sister, Victoria, a successful 38-year-old lawyer in a power suit, asked her questions that sounded innocent but cut like knives. "And your parents, dear? Are they also in the cultural field?" Emma took a sip of water, feeling all eyes on her. "My mother left us when I was 5, she responded with a calm she didn't feel. "My father was a bus driver. He died when I was 16. I live with my grandmother." The silence that followed was deafening. Someone coughed discreetly. Silverware against porcelain sounded too loud. James took her hand under the table, squeezing hard. Their intertwined fingers were a silent message. "I'm here." "You're not alone." "How difficult," Catherine finally murmured, her tone making it clear she didn't know what else to say. "But it's admirable that you've continued your studies despite the circumstances." The rest of the dinner passed in a haze. They talked about investments Emma didn't understand, about people she didn't know, about places she'd never been. She felt increasingly smaller, more invisible, as if she were disappearing in that velvet-upholstered chair. In the car ride back, James drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have put you in that situation." "Don't apologize for your family," Emma replied, looking out the window at Manhattan lights that now seemed cold, distant. "They're just protecting what's theirs. It's natural. I'm an anomaly in their world." "You're not an anomaly." His voice was fierce. "You're the best thing that's happened to me in years, and if they can't see it, that's their problem, not yours." But they both knew it wasn't that simple. Family was important, roots were important, and class differences, no matter how much they wanted to ignore them, were real and deep. That night, James received a call from his mother. Emma was in the bathroom of his apartment when she heard fragments of the conversation through the closed door. "A charming girl, I'm sure, but son, think about the future, think about Lily. She needs a mother figure who understands her world." "Lily needs love, Mother, that's all. Love isn't enough when there's so much difference." "Then maybe your definition of enough is wrong." Emma closed her eyes, leaning against the cold tile wall. She knew James would defend her, but how many times could he do it before getting tired, before the family pressure became too much? When she came out of the bathroom, he was looking out the window at the Manhattan nightlights. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "and I need you to be completely honest. Do you think we can make this work? Really? Not just now in this bubble where it's just you and me, but in the real world with your family, with the differences, with everything?" James turned to her. On his face there was determination, but also fear, and that honesty was what made her believe in his answer. "I don't know," he admitted. I don't have all the answers, but I know I want to try, that I want to fight for this. Is that enough? Emma walked to him, taking his hands in hers. For now, she said, it's enough. But they both knew the real tests were just beginning. Lily Blackwell Davidson was 8 years old, had green eyes like her mother, and a smile that could melt the hardest heart. She arrived in New York to spend Christmas vacation with her father, and Emma was more nervous about meeting her than meeting the entire Blackwell family combined. What if she doesn't like me? She'd asked Rachel on a video call the night before. She's his daughter. She's the most important thing in the world to him. Then you'll make her like you, Rachel responded pragmatically. You're the best person I know. An 8-year-old is going to see that. James had prepared everything carefully. The first meeting would be casual in a park, no pressure. But when Emma saw the little girl running toward her father in Central Park, her heart leaped. The girl threw herself into James's arms with pure joy, and he lifted her spinning, laughing in a way Emma had never heard before. "Daddy, I missed you so much," Lily shouted, hugging him tight. "Me too, Princess." "Me too." When James set her down and indicated she should approach, Lily looked at Emma with those green eyes full of intense curiosity. "Are you Daddy's girlfriend?" she asked directly, without beating around the bush, as only children can. Emma crouched to be at her level. "I'm Emma," she said with a smile. "Your dad has told me a lot about you. He says you're the best reader in all of Chicago." Lily's eyes lit up. "I love reading. Mom says I read too much, but Dad says there's no such thing. Do you like to read?" "I love it. I work in a bookstore. I have thousands of books." "Thousands?" Lily practically jumped. "Can I see them? Can I go to your bookstore? Do you have books about dragons? I love dragons." And just like that, the ice was broken. The following days were magical. Emma took Lily to the bookstore, and the little girl spent hours exploring every corner, touching books with reverence, asking constant questions. Emma read her stories with different voices for each character, making Lily laugh until her stomach hurt. She taught her to make bookmarks with dried flowers they collected together in Central Park, carefully pressing them between old phone book pages. One Sunday afternoon, while making cookies in James's apartment kitchen, him watching them with a smile he couldn't erase, Lily suddenly asked, "Are you going to be my new mom?" Silence fell like a stone in still water. Emma stopped stirring the dough. James stopped breathing. Lily looked at them with those enormous, innocent, honest eyes. Emma began, searching for the right words. "That's something a lot of people would have to decide, sweetheart. Your mom, your dad, you—" "But I want you to be my New York mom," Lily said with that crushing, childlike logic. "Mom is my Chicago mom. You can be my New York mom. That way, I'll have someone to take care of me when I'm here and Daddy's working." Emma felt tears burning her eyes. James approached, putting a hand on her shoulder. "It's a big responsibility," Emma said softly, crouching again to Lily's level. "Being any kind of mom. Are you sure I'd be good at that?" Lily nodded vigorously. "You're the best. You read me stories, you teach me things, you don't yell, and you make Daddy really smile. Not that fake smile he makes on the phone when he talks to work people." James coughed, clearly moved. Emma laughed through tears. "Then let's make a deal," Emma said, extending her small hand toward Lily's even smaller one. "I'm going to work very hard to be the best New York mom you could have. But you have to promise me you'll always tell me if something's wrong or if you need to talk. Deal?" "Deal," Lily responded solemnly, shaking her hand. Then, without warning, she launched herself to hug Emma with a force that almost knocked her over. "I love you, New York mom." That night, after putting Lily to bed in her room full of stuffed animals and books, James and Emma sat on the couch. He embraced her, and she could feel his heart beating against her back. "You're crying," he observed softly, feeling the moisture on his shirt. "They're good tears," she replied. "It's just that I never thought anyone would choose me for something like this. To be important in the life of someone small and perfect like her." "She's not the only one who chose you," James said, turning her to look at him. "I choose you too. Every day. Every moment." They kissed then, sweet and slow, a kiss that tasted of promises and possibilities. And for the first time since that terrible dinner at his mother's house, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. But happiness, as always, is fragile. And there are forces in the world that can break even the most beautiful things. The letter arrived on a sunny Tuesday in January, a white, elegant envelope with the logo of Boston University engraved in the upper corner. Emma opened it with trembling hands while alone in the bookstore during lunch hour. "Dear Miss Taylor," the letter began in formal but warm language, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected to receive a full scholarship from the Excellence in Comparative Literature program." She read the rest in a state of shock. A full year in Boston, all expenses paid, access to one of the best libraries in America, internationally recognized professors. It was the dream of her entire life, the opportunity she never thought she'd have. It was also the end of everything she'd built with James. When he arrived that afternoon, as he did every day at 5 o'clock sharp, he found Emma sitting on the stool behind the counter, the letter still in her hands, her face a mixture of joy and devastation. "What happened?" he asked immediately, alarm in his voice. She handed him the letter without saying anything. She watched him read, watched how his expression went through surprise, pride, and finally, a deep sadness he tried to hide. "This is incredible," he finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "This is exactly what you wanted. Emma, you have to accept. It's a year," she whispered. "A whole year in Boston." "It's your future," he replied, sitting next to her, taking her hands. "It's your dream. But you're here. Lily is here half the time. The bookstore will be here when you return. Lily too, and I—" His voice broke slightly. "I'll be wherever you need me. We can make trips, video calls. I can visit you." Emma looked at him, searching his eyes for any sign of relief, that secretly this separation was what he wanted, an easy exit from a complicated relationship. But she only saw pain and love, and a sacrifice he was willing to make for her. "I don't want to leave," she said, tears finally falling. "I just found you. I just found all this." James embraced her, pressing her against his chest. "Opportunities like this don't come twice," he said against her hair, "and I could never live knowing I was the reason you didn't pursue your dream. Never." But the decision became more complicated when, that same night, James's company faced a crisis no one had foreseen. His principal partner, Robert, a man he'd trusted for 15 years, had been systematically embezzling funds. The auditors had discovered irregularities. There were legal proceedings, investigations. The empire James had carefully built over 2 decades was tottering. "You need to focus on this," Emma told him when he appeared at her apartment at 2 in the morning, haggard, eyes red from exhaustion. "You can't be worrying about me in Boston while your company—" "I don't care about the damn company," he exploded, and it was the first time she'd seen him lose control. "I can rebuild a business. I've started from scratch before, but I can't—" He stopped, breathing deeply. "I can't lose you too." She guided him to the couch, made him sit, prepared tea, though neither would drink it. She sat next to him, her head on his shoulder, their hands intertwined. "We're at a crossroads," she finally said. "We both have to make decisions that will change our lives. And there are no easy answers." "What does your heart tell you to do?" he asked, turning to look at her. "Forget my company, forget everything else. What do you want?" Emma closed her eyes. In her mind, there were 2 clear paths before her. One led to Boston, to university classrooms, to ancient libraries, to a future she'd dreamed of since she was a little girl, reading stories in that bookstore. The other led to James, to Lily, to a life here in New York, building something new and scary and beautiful. "I want both," she admitted, her voice breaking, "and that makes me a terrible person." "No," he said firmly, lifting her chin so she'd look at him. "That makes you human and brave and honest." They spent that night talking until dawn. They made plans, lists of pros and cons, strategies. Emma would accept the scholarship. It would be for a year. James would stabilize the company, delegate more, learn to let go of control. They'd see each other every 2 weeks. They'd do daily video calls. They'd work on this. When the sun began to color the New York sky pink and orange, they both knew they were being optimistic. A year was an eternity when you're building something so fragile. Distance was cruel to young love, but they had to try. The alternative, giving up their dreams, living with resentment, was worse than the risk of failing. Or at least, that's what they told themselves as they clung to each other, knowing that in 2 weeks she'd be on a train to Boston, and nothing would ever be the same. Boston was beautiful. The classes were stimulating. The professors were brilliant. Emma had a small apartment in Back Bay, with windows overlooking historic streets full of history. It should have been perfect. But perfect without the person you love is just emptiness, disguised as success. The first weeks were manageable. James called her every night, no matter how late he was working. He told her about progress in the investigation of his company, about how Lily constantly asked about her, about how the bookstore was functioning well under Anderson's supervision. Emma told him about her classes, about the university's impressive library, about the friends she was making. But there were things left unsaid. Emma didn't mention the nights she spent crying in her narrow bed, missing his smell on the pillows, the weight of his arm around her waist while they slept. James didn't admit he was working 18 hours a day, trying to save his company and keep his mind busy, so he wouldn't go crazy from the distance. James's first visit to Boston in March started wonderfully. They met at the train station, and she ran into his arms, ignoring the looks of other passengers. They spent a long weekend exploring the city, eating seafood at Quincy Market, walking along the Charles River with fingers intertwined. For those 3 days, everything seemed possible again. But when he had to leave, the goodbye at the station was devastating. "I can't do this," Emma whispered against his chest, clinging to his jacket. "It's too hard." "Only 9 months left," he replied, but his voice sounded hollow. "We can do it." Neither of them really believed those words. In April, James's ex-wife reappeared like a ghost from the past. Sarah Davidson had been a marriage of convenience that turned into a disaster. They'd married young when James was just starting his company. She came from a well-off family that provided the initial contacts he needed. They had Lily, but the marriage crumbled under the weight of incompatible expectations and diverging ambitions. Now, 6 years after the divorce, she appeared at James's office one rainy April afternoon, elegant, confident, with a carefully rehearsed proposal. "I've matured," she said, sitting in the chair across from his desk as if she'd never left. "I've had time to think. Lily needs a complete family. You and I could try again." For her. James looked at her, seeing not the woman who was his wife, but a reminder of everything he'd done wrong in his life. Sarah represented the easy path, the safe path. His family would be delighted. Lily would have both parents under one roof. Everything would fit perfectly into expected social molds. "No," he said simply. "I'm in love with someone else." "The girl from the bookstore," Sarah replied, and there was a dismissive tone in her voice. "James, be realistic. How long will that last? She comes from a completely different world. Your family will never accept her. And when it's over, what? How many years will you have wasted?" Those words stuck in him like thorns, not because he thought Sarah was right, but because they were the same fears that kept him awake at night. What James didn't know was that Lily had overheard part of that conversation. The little girl who had come to the office after school, as she sometimes did, was waiting outside, and in her 8-year-old world, the words were misinterpreted. Mom wanted to get back together with Dad. Did that mean Emma would disappear? That night, Lily called Emma crying. "Is it true that Mom and Dad are getting back together?" the girl sobbed. "Because if they are, does that mean you can't be my New York mom anymore? I don't want that. I love you." Emma felt as if her heart was being ripped from her chest. She talked to Lily for an hour, calming her, assuring her that nothing had changed, that she would always be there for her. But when she hung up, she sat in her small Boston apartment, staring at the bare walls, feeling her world crumble. She called James, but he didn't answer. He was in an emergency meeting with lawyers, trying to save what was left of his company. She tried 3 more times throughout the night. Nothing. Emma's mind, tired and stressed, began creating narratives. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe he was realizing this was too complicated. Maybe the distance was showing what had always been there, that they were too different, that this was never going to work. When James finally called her at 3 in the morning, exhausted after 14 hours of meetings, Emma was in a state of complete panic. "Lily called me," she said without preamble. "She says Sarah came to see you. That she wants to get back together with you." James felt exhaustion turn into alarm. "Emma, none of that." "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice sounded small, broken. "Why do I have to find out from an 8-year-old that your ex-wife is trying to get you back?" "Because it doesn't mean anything," he replied, frustration and fatigue making his voice harsher than he intended. "I told her no, clearly. But I have a company that's sinking, lawyers breathing down my neck, and now you—" "Me what?" she interrupted. Am I another problem you have to manage? No, God, no. Emma, that's not... But the damage was done. The unspoken words, the failed communication, the physical distance turning every misunderstanding into an insurmountable mountain. Maybe, Emma said, tears falling down her cheeks, maybe we need time, space, to think about what we're really doing. What are you saying? James's voice sounded strangled. I'm saying that maybe everyone's right. Your mother, Sarah, my own head screaming that this is impossible. Maybe this was a beautiful mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. No, he said fiercely. Don't say that. Emma, I'm tired, you're stressed, but this isn't... I need to hang up, she interrupted, her voice breaking completely. I can't do this right now. And she hung up, leaving James alone in his dark office, staring at the phone as if he could bring her back through pure force of will. They didn't talk for 4 days. 4 days, that felt like 4 years. Emma buried herself in her studies, attending classes like a zombie. James worked non-stop, punishing himself with endless hours because that was better than feeling the pain. It was Margaret, Emma's grandmother, who finally intervened. She showed up in Boston without warning, took a train from New York with her small suitcase and her steel determination. Enough, she said, when Emma opened the door, surprised. Enough of this unnecessary drama. We're going to talk, you and me, like adults. And in the small kitchen of the Boston apartment, over cups of coffee and cookies Margaret had brought from New York, the 82-year-old woman gave her granddaughter the most important talk of her life. Margaret wasn't one for beating around the bush. She never had been in her 82 years of life. Do you love him? She asked directly, stirring her coffee in Emma's small Boston kitchen. Grandma, it's a simple question. Yes or no? Emma looked at her grandmother, at this woman who had raised her with firm hands and a tender heart after her world fell apart when she was a child. Margaret had lost her husband in World War II, had raised 3 children alone during hard times, had survived through recessions and booms, losses and joys. If anyone knew about love and sacrifice, it was her. Yes, Emma whispered. I love him so much it hurts. And that's why I'm scared. Love always hurts, Margaret responded with her practical wisdom. But that pain is like childbirth. It hurts because you're creating something. If it doesn't hurt, it's probably not worth it. Emma laughed through tears. When did you become so wise? I've always been wise, dear. You were just too young to listen. They spent hours talking. Margaret told her stories she'd never shared before, about her first love who died in the war, about how she met Emma's grandfather years later, and at first resisted because she felt loving again was betraying the first, about how she learned that the heart isn't a finite resource, that it can grow and love multiple times in different ways. This man, James, Margaret said, taking her granddaughter's hands, he chose you when he could have chosen anyone. He chose you with all your fears, with your complicated past, with your uncertain future. And you chose him, with his difficult family, with his daughter, with his complicated world. Those choices mean something. But the distance is just geography. Silence is the real killer of relationships. You're letting silence win because you're afraid of being vulnerable. And that, dear, is foolish. Emma genuinely laughed for the first time in days. Only you can call me foolish and make it sound like wisdom, Grandma. That night, Emma made a decision. But before she could act on it, she discovered something that would change everything. She was pregnant. 3 pregnancy tests, bought at 3 different pharmacies, all positive. She sat in the tiny bathroom of her apartment, staring at the 2 pink lines as if they were a code she couldn't decipher. She was pregnant with James Blackwell's child. She was carrying inside her a life that was half of each of them, and they weren't even talking. Initial panic gave way to a strange calm. She touched her belly, still flat, still without visible changes, and felt something deep move in her chest. She didn't know whether to call it instant maternal love or simply existential terror, but it was there, solid and real. She had to tell James. She knew that. But how? By phone after days of silence? By text? Show up in New York and just say it. Margaret found her that night, pale and scared, staring at the ceiling of her bedroom as if it had answers. What's wrong? The old woman asked, her maternal instinct activating immediately. Emma showed her the tests. Margaret looked at them, looked at her granddaughter and then did something unexpected. She smiled. "A baby," she said softly. "My God, a baby! Grandma, this is terrible. We're not even together right now. His company is in crisis. I'm in Boston. How am I going to—" "How are you going to what? Do it alone?" Margaret sat on the bed, taking Emma's cold hands in her warm ones. "Dear, the women of this family have been doing impossible things for generations. Your great-grandmother raised 5 children during the Depression. I lost my husband and kept going. Your mother, well, she made bad decisions, but you're not her. You're stronger." "I'm 23 years old," Emma whispered. "I have no money. I'm studying. I have no idea how to be a mother. No one knows how to be a mother until they are one," Margaret responded pragmatically. "And as for money and everything else, that's why you have to tell that man. Now. Not in a week, not when you have everything figured out. Now." But Emma couldn't. Fear paralyzed her. Fear that this would be the final straw, the complication that would break what little remained between them. Fear of becoming an obligation, a problem to solve instead of a person to love. So she made the hardest decision of her life, not to tell him. At least not yet. Not when everything was so fragile. She'd wait until things calmed down, until his company was stable, until she had a concrete plan. What she didn't know was that Margaret, furious and disappointed by that decision, but also understanding of her granddaughter's terror, would take matters into her own hands. A week later, Margaret appeared at the offices of Blackwell Consulting in Manhattan. She didn't make an appointment. She simply walked in, ignoring the surprised receptionist, and found James in his office surrounded by legal documents and empty coffee cups. "Mr. Blackwell," she said without preamble, "I'm Margaret Taylor, Emma's grandmother, and we need to talk, now." James stood immediately, surprise and something like hope lighting his tired face. "Is it Emma? Is she okay?" "She's pregnant," Margaret said bluntly, because she didn't believe in wrapping difficult truths in soft words. "With your child, and she's trying to handle it alone because she thinks you wouldn't choose her if you knew." James's world stopped. He literally felt as if time froze, as if his heart stopped beating for one complete second. Pregnant. Emma was pregnant. With his child. "Why didn't she tell me?" His voice came out hoarse, strangled. "Because you're 23 and 45 respectively, but emotionally, you're both about 12, Margaret responded dryly. "You're so busy protecting yourselves from pain that you're causing exactly what you fear. So here's my question for you, Mr. Blackwell. What are you going to do about it?" James was already grabbing his coat, looking for car keys. "I'm going to Boston right now." "That's a good answer," Margaret nodded, allowing herself a small smile. "But before you go, you need to know something else. That girl is scared. She thinks she's not good enough for you, that your family will never accept her, that this baby will be a burden tying you to an obligation instead of love. You need to prove her wrong, not with words, with actions." James looked at this 8-decade-old woman who had traveled alone from Boston to New York to confront him, and felt admiration and shame in equal parts. "How?" he asked simply. "How do I prove to her that she and this baby are the best thing that's ever happened to me?" Margaret smiled, a wise and tired smile. "That, Mr. Blackwell, is an answer only you can find, but I suggest you do it quickly. My granddaughter is proud, like her grandfather was. If you leave her alone too long, she'll build walls that will be impossible to tear down." And with that, Margaret left, leaving James alone in his office, with the weight of the world on his shoulders, but also, for the first time in weeks, with a crystal-clear purpose. He was going to be a father, again, with the woman he loved, the woman who hadn't told him because she was afraid of being rejected, which meant he had failed. He'd failed to make her feel safe, to let her know she was his priority, his choice, his future. It was time to fix that. James arrived in Boston at 11 at night. He drove the whole way from New York, 4 hours of highway, where his mind didn't stop for a second. He had called Emma 15 times. She didn't answer any. He had sent messages. No response. When he arrived at the small building in Back Bay where she lived, the windows of her apartment were dark. James stood on the historic street looking up, his heart pounding so hard he thought it would explode. He dialed once more. This time, after 6 rings, she answered. "James." Her voice sounded small, scared. "I'm downstairs," he said simply. "On your street. I need to see you." Silence, then, "It's very late. I don't care. Emma, I know about the baby. And I need you to look me in the eyes and tell me why you thought, even for a second, that I wouldn't want to know." He heard a sob on the other end of the line. Then the line went dead. But 2 minutes later, the building door opened. Emma was in pajamas, with her hair loose falling over her shoulders, eyes red and swollen. She looked vulnerable and strong at the same time, and James felt as if his chest was being compressed. "How did you find out?" she asked, crossing her arms over her stomach in an instinctively protective gesture. "Your grandmother came to see me. God bless her, because it seems we two are too proud or too foolish to be honest with each other." Emma closed her eyes, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "I was going to tell you." "When?" There was no anger in his voice, only pain. "When the baby was born? When it was 5 years old?" "Emma, how could you think I wouldn't want to know? Because your life is a mess right now," she exploded, her voice rising in the empty street. "Your company is falling apart. Your ex-wife wants you back. Your family hates me. We're 4 hours apart. And I didn't want to be another problem. I didn't want you to choose me out of obligation." James closed the distance between them in 2 strides, taking her face in his hands. "You have never been a problem," he said fiercely. "From the first moment you entered my life, you've been the solution to years of living on autopilot, of chasing things that didn't matter, of forgetting what it meant to feel something real. And this baby," he put a hand on her still flat belly, "this baby isn't an obligation. It's a miracle. It's a second chance to do things right." "But your family—" "To hell with my family if they can't see how incredible you are. Emma, I've spent 45 years trying to please everyone except myself, and the only thing that has made me truly happy in all those years is you. So if I have to choose between their approval and you, it's not even a choice. It's you. It will always be you," she sobbed, leaning against him, letting him hold her on the dark Boston street, while stray cats watched from the shadows and neighbors' windows remained discreetly closed. "I'm scared," she whispered against his chest. "I'm so scared. I don't know how to be a mother. I barely know how to be an adult." "I didn't know either the first time," he admitted, stroking her hair. "With Lily, I got 1,000 things wrong. I worked too much, was absent too long, but this time I'm going to do it differently. We're going to do it differently. Together." "How?" she asked, looking up at him. "How are we going to make it work when we can't even maintain a long-distance relationship?" "Then we eliminate the distance," he replied, and there was determination in his voice. "You finish this semester here. It's May. You only have a month and a half left. Then you come back to New York. You can continue your studies there if you want, or you can take some time. Whatever it is, we decide together. As a couple. As a family. And your company. I can manage the company from anywhere, and if I can't, then maybe it's time to simplify. I've been thinking a lot these past weeks, Emma. I built an empire, but for what? To have more money than I can ever spend? To impress people I don't care about? You made me remember what's really worth it. Time, connection, love. And I'm not going to keep sacrificing that for numbers in a bank account." Emma looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. Or maybe she was seeing him clearly for the first time, without the filters of fear and insecurity. "I love you," she said, the words coming out like a confession, a promise, an anchor. "I love you so much that sometimes I don't know what to do with this feeling." "Love me more," he replied simply. "That's all the instruction you need, and let me love you. Let me take care of you, not because I think you're weak, but because I want to. Because taking care of the people you love isn't a burden, it's a privilege." They kissed then on the dark Boston street, with the baby neither had planned growing between them like a promise of the future. It was a kiss that tasted of tears and relief, of fear and hope, of everything they had been and everything they could be. The neighbors definitely saw them. Mrs. Chen from the 3rd floor probably took pictures. But in that moment, it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except this: 2 imperfect people trying to create something perfect from the chaos of their lives. That night, James stayed in Emma's small apartment. They slept together in the narrow bed, his large protective hand on her belly, feeling something that couldn't yet be felt, but that he already loved with every fiber of his being. And for the first time in weeks, they both slept deeply. without nightmares, without nocturnal fears. Just peace. The peace of knowing that whatever came, they would face it together. The following months were an exercise in balance. Emma finished the semester in Boston with excellent grades, though first trimester fatigue made many classes a battle against sleep. James traveled every weekend, accumulating miles between New York and Boston like war medals earned on the battlefield of love. When Emma finally returned to New York at the end of June, with her belly already beginning to round subtly, she found a different New York. Or maybe she was different. She had grown during those months, matured, learned that love isn't just beautiful feelings and perfect moments, but daily choice, constant work, honest communication. James had made radical changes in his life. He had completely restructured the company, appointing an operational CEO to handle day-to-day, while he took on the role of board chairman, active, but not omnipresent. He had reduced his participation in several projects, liquidating some assets and simplifying the corporate structure. "It's liberating," he confessed one night while they ate dinner in his apartment, which was slowly becoming theirs. "I spent 20 years building more and more, without asking myself why. Now I have enough for 100 lifetimes, and I finally understand that what matters isn't how much you have, but who you have it for." Lily was a bright light through the whole process. The girl, who would spend the entire summer in New York, was ecstatic about the baby news. "I'm going to be a big sister," she announced to everyone who would listen, "and I'm going to teach them everything. How to read, how to ride a bike, how to make cookies. Everything." She helped prepare the baby's room with heart-melting enthusiasm. They chose soft yellow for the walls, a neutral color, because they decided not to know the sex until birth. Lily painted fluorescent stars on the ceiling with James's help, the two heads, one small and blonde, one large and dark, bent together as they worked. "So the baby will never be afraid of the dark," Lily explained, with that simple childhood wisdom. "There will always be light." James's family was another story. Catherine took weeks to call after learning about the pregnancy. When she finally did, the conversation was tense, full of uncomfortable silences and half-finished sentences. Victoria, his sister, was more direct in her disapproval. "You're making a mistake," she told James during a tense lunch. "That girl is too young, too—" "Careful what you're about to say," James interrupted, his voice low but dangerous. "Because that girl is the mother of my child, and the woman I love. And if you can't respect her, then we have a problem, you and I." It was Michael, James's best friend, who finally mediated. He organized a dinner at his house, neutral territory, and invited Catherine and Victoria along with James and Emma. The evening started stiff, with Emma visibly uncomfortable in a dress that barely concealed her 5-month belly. But there was a moment of change. Catherine asked about the baby, more out of politeness than genuine interest, and Emma began talking about how the Kicks felt, about the book she was reading on motherhood, about her fears and hopes. And something in her raw honesty, in her lack of pretension, touched something in James's mother. "When I was pregnant with James," Catherine said slowly, her fingers playing with the wine glass, "I was terrified too. I was 21, had just gotten married, had no idea how to be a mother. My mother-in-law," she grimaced, "was so critical she made me cry. I promised never to be like that with my children's partners." She looked at Emma directly for the first time that evening. "I haven't kept that promise with you, and I'm sorry. You've been treated unfairly by me, by us. James is right. We're more worried about what others think than about his happiness." "And that," her voice broke slightly, "that's the opposite of what a mother should do." Emma felt tears burning her eyes. "I just want to make him happy," she said simply, "and be a good mother to his child. Our child. I don't pretend to be something I'm not, but I promise to love him with everything I have." Victoria, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "That's more than many people in our world can say." She looked at her brother. "Okay, James, I understand. And," she looked at Emma, "I'm going to try to really know you without prejudices, okay? It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a movie reconciliation with hugs and tears. It was awkward and clumsy and full of heavy silences, but it was a beginning. And sometimes that's all you need." Margaret, who had been a silent witness to all the drama, gave her characteristically direct verdict. Finally, those women found some common sense. About time, I'd say. The biggest change, however, came from James himself. He made a decision that surprised everyone, including Emma. He transferred half his shares in the main company to a charitable trust he'd created, focused on helping low-income families with education and housing. He sold the big house in the Hamptons and bought a smaller but cozy brownstone in Greenwich Village near the bookstore, near Washington Square Park, near the real and vibrant New York where Emma had grown up. "I don't need a mansion," he explained as they walked through the new neighborhood, fingers intertwined. "I need a home, and a home is where my family is." The bookstore changed too. With Anderson's approval, who was delighted, they transformed the building's second floor, which had been empty for years, into a literary events space. Book clubs, book launches, writing workshops. Emma, though pregnant and sometimes exhausted, directed everything with a passion that made her eyes shine. "This is what I always dreamed of," she confessed to James one night after a particularly successful event. "Not just selling books, but creating community around them. Making reading accessible and exciting for everyone." "Then let's make it bigger," he replied. "When the baby's born and you're ready, let's open a second bookstore, one in a neighborhood that needs it, and then maybe a third. Not to make money, but to—" He searched for words. "To change the world little by little," she completed, smiling. "One book at a time." They kissed, surrounded by shelves of old books, while outside New York continued its noisy and indifferent nightlife. And in that kiss there were promises, of future, of family, of building together something beautiful from the broken pieces of their past lives. The baby kicked hard, as if agreeing. September arrived with stifling heat that made Emma, now 7.5 months pregnant, feel like a beached whale. Her belly was enormous, every movement required strategic planning, and her ankles were so swollen she could only wear sandals. "I look like a planet," she complained one afternoon, looking at herself in the bedroom mirror with despair. James, who was assembling the crib for the 15th time because the first, second, third, and 14th attempts went wrong, looked up and smiled. "You look beautiful. You look perfect. You look like the woman carrying my child, and whom I'll love every day of my life, even when you're being dramatic about your ankles." "I'm not being dramatic," she protested, though she couldn't help smiling. "My shoes literally don't fit. I had to buy sandals 2 sizes bigger. 2 sizes, James." He stood, leaving the crib pieces scattered on the floor. They'd probably have to hire someone professional to assemble it, and walked to her. He knelt before her swollen belly and kissed it gently. "Little one," he said, talking to the baby, "your mother is a saint for putting up with you these 9 months. When you come out, you owe her at minimum 20 years of breakfast in bed." 30, Emma corrected, running her fingers through James's dark hair, finding some new grey that wasn't there before. "And daily foot massages." The childbirth preparation classes were an adventure. They were by far the most unusual couple in the group. There were young couples her age, 40-something couples with second or third babies, but no one like them, 23 and 45, with over 20 years difference and the visible tension of 2 worlds trying to merge. The instructor, an experienced midwife named Carol, made no comments about their differences. She treated them like any other couple, with patience, professionalism, and occasional jokes about how men always faint in the delivery room. "I'm not going to faint," James insisted with wounded dignity after one class. "That's what they all say," Emma responded with amusement. "And then they end up on the floor while nurses have to take care of them too." James looked at her with a serious expression. "I've built companies from scratch. I've closed million-dollar deals. I've given speeches in front of hundreds of people. I'm not going to faint watching my child be born." Emma just smiled, because she knew he meant it seriously, and secretly she loved him even more for that determination, even if it was possibly naive. The final stretch of pregnancy brought unexpected visitors. Sarah, James's ex-wife, asked to see him. They met at a neutral cafe, and this time, with Emma's permission, because transparency had become their new religion. "I just wanted to apologize," Sarah said, her hands wrapping around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. "I was inappropriate, selfish. I thought—" She sighed. "I thought we could turn back time. But time only goes in one direction. And you've found something real with her, something we never had." "I'm sorry if I hurt you," James responded honestly. "It wasn't my intention when all this started." "You didn't hurt me," Sarah smiled sadly. My pride, maybe. But my heart. The heart was never really involved between us, was it? We were convenient for each other, functional, but there wasn't love, not like what you have now. They parted civilly. Sarah even asked to meet Emma at some point, not as a rival, but as the woman who would be an important figure in Lily's life. It was a gesture of maturity that James deeply appreciated. Catherine, slowly but consistently, began to appear more. She brought baby clothes from expensive boutiques Emma could never have afforded. At first, Emma felt it was a show of superiority, but Margaret, with her usual wisdom, corrected her. It's her way of apologizing without saying the words. Some of us weren't raised to apologize with words, we do it with actions. Accept the gift with grace, dear, it's a bridge she's building. And Emma did. She accepted the gifts, thanked sincerely, and little by little began to see Catherine not as the formidable mother-in-law, but as a woman who had also struggled, who had made mistakes, who was trying to make amends in her own way. One Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks before the due date, something unexpected happened. Emma was at the bookstore, now working only part-time because the pregnancy exhausted her, when a group of elderly people entered. They were from a reading club at a nearby senior center. "We heard this place organizes special sessions," said a lady of about 80 with vibrant energy. "We want to read Emily Dickinson. Could you help us?" Emma moved, organized everything. Every Tuesday afternoon the group would come. They'd read American poetry, they'd discuss, debate, share tea and cookies. It wasn't profitable from a business perspective, but it was exactly why the bookstore existed. When James arrived that afternoon and found Emma crying with emotion as she described the group, he hugged her from behind, as much as her belly allowed, and whispered, "This is how you change the world. One group of seniors at a time, one book at a time, one human connection at a time." "I love you," she said, turning in his arms. "Thank you for believing in this, in me, in us." "Always," he replied, kissing her forehead. "Always." Labor began naturally at the most inconvenient moment possible. During a critical business dinner, James couldn't cancel. Well, technically he could, but Emma had insisted he go because it was important, and she was fine, and there were still 3 days until the due date. The first contraction started while Emma and Lily were watching a Disney movie on the couch. Lily, with her newly turned 9 years and her love for drama, panicked immediately. "The baby! The baby's coming! Call Daddy, call 911, call whoever you call when babies come." "Calm down, sweetie," Emma said, breathing through a contraction that wasn't terrible but definitely real. "Contractions just started. We probably have hours. Call your dad and tell him he can finish his dinner calmly." But when James received the call, there was no power on earth that would keep him at that negotiating table. He left the restaurant, leaving 3 confused executives with an unpaid bill and Michael's hasty explanation, who also rushed out because, "I can't miss this." James drove through Manhattan night traffic like he was in an action movie. Michael, in the passenger seat, clung to the seatbelt. "You're going to kill us before the baby arrives," he shouted as James squeezed between 2 taxis. "Then help me by calling the midwife," James shouted back. "The number's in my phone." They arrived at the apartment in record time. James took the stairs 2 at a time, burst into the apartment like a whirlwind, and found Emma and Lily calm, extremely calm. Emma was lying on the couch with a heating pad on her back, timing contractions on her phone. Lily was making her tea. "Hi," Emma said, looking at him with amusement. "How was dinner?" "How was—" James was speechless. "You said the baby was coming." "And it is," she responded serenely, "but contractions are 10 minutes apart. According to midwife Carol, we still have hours. Sit down, breathe, you look worse than me." And so the wait began. They called Margaret, who appeared with an army of supplies, towels, blankets, food, as if the hospital wouldn't have anything. Catherine also came, surprisingly, bringing a bouquet of white flowers. "For after," she said simply, kissing Emma's cheek. "For when it's all over and you can enjoy them." Emma moved, took her hand and squeezed it. The 2 women, separated by age, class, history, shared a moment of silent understanding. They were about to become grandmother and mother of the same child. That united them permanently. At midnight, the contractions intensified, 4 minutes apart. It was time. James helped Emma down to the car, his face a mixture of excitement and pure terror. "Breathe, love," Emma said, being the one calming him. Everything's going to be fine. I know, he lied, his hands shaking as he started the car. Totally fine. Perfectly calm. Michael, following them in another car with Margaret and Lily, called by phone. "Don't forget the hospital bag," he shouted. James and Emma looked at each other in horror. The bag, with all the baby clothes, documents, necessary things. It was at home. "I'll bring it," Michael said with a sigh. "You guys go." "Margaret, can you remind me where the bag is?" Mount Sinai Hospital was relatively quiet for a Friday night. Midwife Carol was on duty, which Emma considered a small miracle. The following hours were a blur of pain, relief, more pain, and James, true to his word, never fainted, though he turned green on a couple of occasions. "You're doing amazingly," he kept telling her, holding her hand, though she was squeezing so hard he'd probably have bruises. "You're the strongest woman I know. I hate all men," Emma panted during a particularly brutal contraction. "Especially you." "That's fair," James nodded, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Totally fair." At 4:32 in the morning, with the New York sky beginning to tinge with the first pink tones of dawn, a loud cry filled the delivery room. A healthy, indignant cry from a baby who definitely wasn't happy about being removed from their warm, comfortable place. "It's a boy," Carol announced, lifting the baby covered in vernix and blood and absolutely perfect. "A beautiful boy." They placed him on Emma's chest, and she looked at this tiny being, 7 pounds 3 ounces of pure humanity, with total wonder. His blue eyes, identical to his father's, blinked confused against the light. He had dark hair from both of them, stuck to his head with birth fluids. His hands were the size of walnuts, fingers perfect, nails tiny. "Hello, little one," Emma whispered, tears flowing freely down her face. "We've been waiting for you." James, standing by the bed, looked at his son with an expression Emma had never seen before. It was pure adoration, pure fear, pure love, all mixed in an intensity that left him speechless. He extended a trembling finger, and the baby grabbed it instinctively, his tiny fingers wrapping around his father's large finger. "He's perfect," James finally managed to say, his voice broken. "He's absolutely perfect." "Like his father," Emma smiled, exhausted but happy. "Like his mother," he corrected, leaning to kiss her sweaty forehead. "Thank you. Thank you for this gift. Thank you for being so brave. Thank you for everything." When the nurses finally cleaned the baby and returned him wrapped in a blue hospital blanket, James held him for the first time. And in that moment, with his son in his arms and Emma watching them with a tired smile, James finally understood what he'd been searching for his entire life. It wasn't success. It wasn't recognition. It wasn't power or money or respect from strangers. It was this moment, this connection, this love that hurt from its intensity. Outside in the waiting room, Margaret cried with joy in Catherine's arms, and the two grandmothers, so different but united by this baby, shared tissues and laughter. Lily jumped with excitement, insisting on being the first to meet her little brother. Michael opened a bottle of cheap champagne from the vending machine, and they toasted to life, to second chances, to miracles that happen on ordinary nights in New York hospitals. And when they finally allowed visitors, and Lily ran in and froze seeing the baby so small, so vulnerable in her father's arms, something changed in her childish expression. She matured 10 years in a second. "Hi, little brother," she whispered, touching his cheek gently with one finger. "I'm Lily, your big sister, and I'm always going to take care of you. I promise." The baby, as if understanding, opened his eyes and looked directly at Lily. And in that moment, a family, complicated, imperfect, beautiful, solidified into something permanent. They named him Daniel, Daniel Blackwell Taylor, a name that carried both surnames, both worlds, both stories. The autumn sun entered through the windows of the bookstore's second floor, now transformed into a vibrant space full of people. It was the official opening of the second Taylor Blackwell bookstore, this time in Harlem, one of the neighborhood's most in need in Manhattan. Emma, now 25 years old but with a maturity that made her seem older, held Daniel on her hip. The 2-year-old, with his dark curls and bright blue eyes, pointed at the colorful balloons decorating the ceiling. "Boons!" he shouted, with his limited but enthusiastic vocabulary. "Balloons, sweetie," Emma corrected, kissing his chubby cheek. Balloons. Boons, Daniel insisted, because at 2 years old, you have your own ideas about how to pronounce things. James, now with more grey at his temples but with a lighter smile than 2 years ago, was cutting the inaugural ribbon with the district councilwoman. There was press, not much, but enough to spread the word. The bookstore wasn't just commerce, it was a community centre. There would be free book clubs, homework help for neighbourhood kids, literacy classes for adults, all funded by the foundation James had created. This place, James said in his brief speech, isn't just about selling books. It's about creating community, about giving every person, regardless of their background or circumstance, access to the tools that can change their lives. And all of this, he looked directly at Emma, is thanks to an incredible woman who taught me that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in lives touched. The audience applauded. Emma felt tears in her eyes, something that happened a lot lately. Being a mother had made her more emotional, more aware of life's fragility and beauty. Lily, now 11 years old and turned into a pre-teen with opinions about everything, materialized beside her. Daniel wants down, she announced. I'll watch him. You go with Dad. Emma handed over her son with gratitude. Seeing Lily with Daniel always warmed her heart. The girl had kept her promise. She was the best big sister imaginable, patient, protective, loving, and Daniel adored her. After the ceremony there was an informal cocktail. Catherine was there, now completely integrated into their lives, spoiling Daniel scandalously. Victoria had brought her own children, cousins for Daniel, who chased him through the store with high-pitched laughter. Margaret, more fragile at 84 but still with that indomitable spirit, sat in a cushioned chair someone had brought, observing everything with matriarchal satisfaction. "You did it, child," she told Emma when she sat beside her for a moment. "You built exactly what you dreamed of, and you found love along the way. Your grandfather would be so proud." "You taught me it was possible," Emma replied, taking her grandmother's veined hand. "That the women of this family don't give up, no matter how hard it gets." "No," Margaret nodded. "We don't give up. We're stubborn as mules and brave as lions." Guess the Taylor recipe for survival. That night, after everyone had left and the bookstore was closed, James and Emma walked through Harlem streets back to their car. Daniel slept in the carrier against his father's chest, his breathing soft and rhythmic. Lily walked a few steps ahead, talking on the phone with her friends about something urgent and incomprehensible of pre-adolescence. "Do you remember that first night?" Emma suddenly asked. "When you came into the bookstore soaked by rain looking for a book about the Brooklyn Bridge?" "Like it was yesterday," James replied, his free hand seeking hers. "I remember thinking there was something different about you, something that made me want to stay. I thought you were just another rich customer," she admitted with a laugh. "Someone who would pass through my life for 5 minutes and disappear. And here we are," he said, stopping to look at her under the orange light of a street lamp. 2 years, a son, 2 bookstores, and thousands of moments later, still not wanting to disappear. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, because even now, even after everything, sometimes insecurity crept in. "Everything you changed? The simpler life, the smaller company?" "Emma," he interrupted, taking her face in his free hands, "the only thing I regret is not meeting you sooner. All those years I wasted chasing things that didn't matter. But the rest—" He looked at the sleeping baby against his chest, then at Lily ahead, then back at her. "The rest is the best thing that's ever happened to me." They kissed there, on an ordinary Harlem street, while a bus passed noisily and a dog barked on some balcony. It wasn't cinematic or perfect, it was real, like everything they'd built, real, imperfect, beautiful in its ordinariness. 6 months later, Emma would defend her master's thesis she'd been working on between diapers and bottles and sleepless nights. The title, Literature as a Tool for Social Transformation, a Case Study. Her case study, the community bookstores they'd created. A year after that, James would surprise everyone, including Emma, by selling his last major stake in the company and announcing he'd dedicate himself full-time to the foundation and being the best dad of young kids in the world, even though I'm old. "You're not old," Emma would say, laughing. "You're just mature." "That's a fancy way of saying old," he'd respond. 2 years after that, Lily would start high school and declare that when she grew up, She'd study education to teach in underprivileged communities, like Emma Mom taught me. And 3 years after that, on a rainy October night surprisingly similar to that first night, Emma would flip the closed sign on the original bookstore and find James waiting outside, soaked once again. "What are you doing here?" she'd ask, confused. He'd pull out a small box from his pocket. Inside, a simple white gold ring. "It occurred to me," he'd say, "that I never did this properly. The first time was chaos and panic and pregnancy. But now that we have time and clarity, Emma Taylor, will you marry me, officially?" And she'd say yes, of course yes. Because after everything they'd been through, all the storms they'd weathered, all the obstacles they'd overcome, the only thing that made sense was to keep choosing each other, day after day, moment after moment. They'd get married in a small ceremony in the courtyard of the first bookstore building, surrounded by books and family and friends. Daniel, 5 years old by then, would be the ring-bearer and trip over his own feet, causing general laughter. Lily would read an Emily Dickinson poem with a voice trembling with emotion. Margaret would cry openly, without apologizing. And when the officiant asked if there was any reason they shouldn't marry, Daniel would shout, "They already live together," causing another round of laughter. But that would be years in the future. In this moment, on this bookstore opening night, all that mattered was this: an unlikely family, built from brave choices and stubborn love, walking together through New York streets toward home. James squeezed Emma's hand. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That you were right," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder as they walked. "That first night in the bookstore, when you said you were looking for a book for someone special. You didn't know it then, but that someone was me. And that book," she smiled, "was our story. Only it hadn't been written yet." "And what a story it's been," he murmured, kissing her head. "The best I've ever read." Up ahead, Lily turned around. "Hurry up, lovebirds, I'm hungry and Daniel's going to wake up soon." "Coming," Emma called out, laughing. And they kept walking, toward the car, toward home, toward their imperfect and perfect and wonderfully theirs future. Because in the end, life isn't about fairy tale endings. It's about choosing every day to build your own version of happiness, about finding someone who chooses you back, about creating beauty from chaos, love from uncertainty, family from unlikely connections. It's about rainy nights that change everything, and having the courage to open the door when fate knocks drenched, asking for shelter.